Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back to Professional Writing. I'm Professor Mike, and today we're going to talk about conclusions. And what are we talking about? Oh, yeah, we're going to talk about writing an effective discussion and a conclusion, okay, as well as something about like citing your sources, okay, like so that you avoid plagiarism. Before we go into today's lesson, though, I want to say thank you very much to everybody for sending me an abstract. I'm going to send out basically my comments later on today. So the first thing that I need to do this morning, though, is get this video recorded, uploaded to YouTube so you guys can watch it. And so you'll either get an email from me today or tomorrow, with your abstract. Um, if you sent me a Word abstract, that's great because I did kind of a correction to, like just to show you some of, your, I guess, I don't know if I want to say that I want to show you where you made your mistakes, but these are things that you can look for when you write your next paper, okay? Like where to place a comma, word order. Many of you also had problems with the and with the definite article or the indefinite article. So things like that, spelling, but that's typical. So also, your abstract, it's not like graded, okay? I don't want you to think that you're going to get an A or a B or a C for your abstract, but basically, you either get comments, I've either told you, shorten it in some places or try to avoid something like that. But many of you guys did, like, you guys were like bang on, okay? That's a great expression for in English. Bang on, or you nailed it. You nailed it, okay? It means that you did it perfectly. So I'm really impressed. And a lot of you probably just got a comment that said, great work, keep up the good work. Your abstract can't get any better. So, all right, so I'll leave it at that. And yeah, let's get into today's lesson then. Okay, everybody. So your discussion. So think about it. Like, why is it so important? Well, I've written like my own definition here. So you're going to explain the meaning of the results. Okay. That's the purpose of the discussion. Okay. Your results in your results section. Okay. Like with your graphs and tables and things like that, any kind of statistics. Okay. Those need to be written plain and simple, black and white. Okay. But your discussion section is going to go a little bit more in detail, okay? So there are elements of the discussion that should be included, okay, and things that should be avoided. So always write the discussion for the reader, okay? So remember, at this point here, you're not writing for yourself, for your supervisor. Well, I guess for your supervisor, he's a reader too, or she's a reader too. But remember that the focus should be to help the reader understand the study, and that the highlight should be, like, the emphasis, dworas, should be on the study data. All right, and so let's have a look here. Just going to raise this a little bit. Hang on a second. I'm going to find a book and put it under there. Oh, that looks great. And okay, so some of the elements that you need to include in your discussion. Okay, so for example, you need to also restate your major findings. Okay, you need to explain the meaning and importance of these findings. Okay. And of course, relate the findings to those of similar studies. Okay, so you're thinking about those other authors, that began the work in 1970, 1980, 1990, even in the 2000s or whenever, and you're continuing with their work. Okay, so you're going to have to put, or at least indicate a relationship between your findings and theirs, okay, to show the significance. All right, you can also consider any alternative explanations, okay, and you can also state the clinical relevance of the findings, okay. And again, you can also acknowledge, like uznavat, the study's limitations, obmedzenia. Okay, maybe there wasn't enough time. Maybe there wasn't enough money. That's always a big problem, is funding. Okay, maybe weather conditions, maybe COVID-19, COVID-19, restricted, limited, obmedzit, many research studies. So you can even include that, okay? All right, and then of course you can also make the suggestions for further research. Okay, you can also leave this until the end at the conclusion section. All right then. So when we talk about our major findings, okay, so this should be the very first paragraph of the discussion. All right, so it's got to be direct, okay, declarative, okay, to declare, right? This is a declaration of what we found, and succinct, okay? Remember, this is stručný, okay, presný. This is very clear, okay, clear and short. Proclamation, which is, a statement of the study results, okay? I think you call this tvrdenie in Slovak. All right, then. But it should not include any data or reference to this study, okay? At least at this moment when you're talking about your major findings. Okay, so one example then. All right, so if we are talking about, well, it looks like, I was thinking for a moment, this has to do with COVID, but it's something else. So our results confirm that these nasal and full face masks, okay, the rouška, are similarly efficient over 15 minutes of, I don't know what any of this is, cardiopulmonary disease patients, I don't know what that is, recovering from acute hypercanic respiratory failure. Okay, so this is your declaration right there. Okay, this is what happened. Our results confirm, okay, potvrdit, that these masks are efficient, účinné. And this clearly states the most important finding of that study, okay? You can also go on and say our findings suggest that ambient light has no statistically significant effect on SpO2 readings, and that ambient light's effect on SpO2 is clinically unimportant. So this is something different regarding light or ambient light on what I don't even know what SpO2 is. If somebody knows what SpO2 is, please send me an email. That would be great. Okay, so let's have a look here then. So now that we've stated our major findings, hang on a second, I'm just going to adjust this tripod a bit better. There. Okay, so now that we've stated what they are, we can also explain the meaning of the findings and why the findings are important. So for example, as the person who conceived, designed, and conducted the study, that's you, okay, the meaning of the results and their importance seems obvious to you, of course, but however, they might not be so clear for the person reading your paper for the first time, okay? So one of the purposes of the discussion, of course, is to explain the meaning, why they're important, but you don't want to sound arrogant. Be careful about that. Condescending, okay, condescending is a great word to sound like it's another word for arrogance too, but it's a way of speaking like you are the authority and the person listening is an idiot, okay? That's what condescending is. Same with patronizing. Both of these words are when you talk to somebody, when you talk down to somebody, like you know best. Okay, so you don't want to sound like that. All right, after reading the discussion, well, you want the reader to think that, well, yeah, okay, that makes perfect sense, okay? Why hadn't I thought of that? Okay, so you're going to evoke thoughts and thinking, Okay, and the person will be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense, and that's something I had never thought about before. So when you have your similar studies, okay, so just remember that really no study is so novel and with such a restricted focus that has no relation, to other previously published papers, okay? As PhD students in either your first year or second year, but especially your first year, I do know from my years of working at Comenius University, specifically the faculty, our faculty, the Faculty of Natural Sciences, that generally first year students of PhD programs, and it's general like that all over the world, you're going to be expanding on knowledge that's been, already, or I shouldn't just say knowledge, but expanding on research that was already previously published, and most often it's something ongoing. Okay, so you have to remember, you have to relate your study findings to those other studies. Okay, so very often you're going to be giving acknowledgement and citing your supervisor or co-workers, other PhD students in later years of their PhD program. Okay, you have to also either answer or at least acknowledge any questions that may, that rise, okay, that were raised by previous studies, okay? And the findings of other studies, of course, may support your findings, okay? So remember, it's going to strengthen, posilovat, the importance of your study results. So here's one example. Our finding, or our findings, if there are more, okay, that changing inline suction catheters less frequently is associated with lower cost and no higher incidence of VAP replicates the findings of a randomized controlled trial conducted by Kolev et al. Okay, actually, there should be a date here, okay, I don't know why it's not there, upon which our amended policy was based. All right. Now, when we think of these alternative explanations, okay, also remember, it's important to remember that the purpose of the research, the purpose really, this is great, is to discover and not to prove, okay? So that's why they're called findings, okay? So it's an enlightenment. So it's easy to fall into a trap, okay? Trap is a pastsa, okay? Of designing the study to prove your bias, okay? So these are your predsudki, rather than to discover the truth. So be careful. You need to keep your opinion away from it, okay? You can keep your thoughts, but, like your thoughts or ideas are fine in the discussion. Okay, but keep your opinion that you're trying to prove something. Remember that the research is not about you, but it's about the science itself. All right. So when you state the clinical relevance of the findings, so the reason we conduct studies is to improve something. We know that. So it's important to present the findings of your study in the context of practice. So for whom or what do the results apply to? Okay. And for whom and what do they not apply? Okay. So think about it. You have some specific results. Okay. I don't know if I should have used the word apply, but who do they, who do they have the biggest effect on? Okay. Who do they affect? Okay. Or what do they affect? What are the implications? All right. Now, as I said earlier, you're going to have limitations, of course, like COVID-19 could be one as well. All right. So all studies have limitations. Unfortunately, the limitations of some studies are fatal. Okay. Smrtelne, flaws, vadi, okay, chyby, that preclude publication. However, even the best studies in the most prestigious journals have limitations. So it is far better for you to identify and acknowledge your study's limitations than to have them pointed out by a peer reviewer, okay? Some opponent or somebody like that, or just a reader. Okay, sometimes that happens. They send a letter to the editor, and they're like, "Well, there's something wrong there." Okay, something. There is a limitation, but it wasn't indicated. All right, and of course, you're going to make suggestions for further study. Okay, so like laboratory experimental studies, they lead to suggestions for follow-up clinical studies with human subjects. Okay, or they might say something. We're only in the trial period. Okay, with the laboratory mice and the laboratory rats. Okay, so it's not possible, or it won't be possible for some time before we can do human studies. All right. Now, if you have that take-home message, okay, so you have to think, what do you want the reader to remember by your study? Okay, things that you need to avoid. Don't overrepresent the results. All right. All the results are important, of course, but you don't want to, to focus too much on some results and not enough on others. Speculation where it's unwarranted, where there's no proof. Okay, so keep your opinion out of things as well. Okay, inflation, like if you have an opinion that has no support, is what I'm trying to say here, or no proof to back you. Remember, inflation of the importance of the findings. Okay, so again, you have some results you're only talking about, and you're just talking about how they're just so important or anything like that. Any tangential issues, okay, where things can go to different branches and so on. And also, there's something called with the bully pulpit, okay. And these are conclusions that really aren't supported by any data, okay? So again, all of this is basically saying keep out, your opinions or unsupported, unsupported conclusions. All right, and of course that take-home message, okay? But, save this for the conclusion section as well, okay? That's where I would keep it. You could lead to it, but I would keep that in your conclusion. All right then. I don't know if I really want to go through all this again. This is just basically going back to everything I just said, okay? But why not? We'll go through it quickly. With your results, okay, you have to be careful that, that your results do not go beyond what is supported by data, okay? That's what data is. It's nothing more and nothing less. Okay, your speculation, again, you have to keep focused just on your data, okay? So if the subjects in your study had asthma, well, it's usually not appropriate to speculate about how your findings might apply to other populations, okay? So in this case, stay as focused as possible. All right, then. You have to keep focused just on that hypothesis and your study results. Okay, remember, it's like these VET-V. You don't want to have things like that. You just want to stay on the road, okay? Because if you start talking about other issues, ine problematiki, that distracts. It will be rozptýlený. And the reader will be, zmeteni, it's metúci. Okay, so be careful about that. Because, look at that. The tangential issues, they run the risk of diluting and confounding. Confounding is, again, to confuse. That's a great word in French. I know that. Confondre. Okay, je me confonde. I'm confused. All right, and now our bully pulpit. Okay, the pulpit is the podium, bully is tyran. Okay, so you have to be careful because you don't want to criticize your other studies. Again, this is where you don't want to be arrogant, that you know best, that you know better than other people or anything like that. So you're not, you don't use it to attack other investigators, okay? You don't want to preach, okay? Preach is like prednášat, okay, like to lecture. But preach is like a preacher, like a kňaz, okay? I don't know how to say it in Slovak or in French for that matter, but you don't want to, you know, sound like you're a rodič, a ty vieš najlepšie. All right, then. Okay, so remember, if your conclusions that aren't supported by the data, be careful about that. All right, this is a tight package, your hypothesis, your study, okay, either your experiment, your field work, everything like that, your results, your data, and your conclusions. Okay, they are all, you know, one, you know, celi balik. Avoid the temptation to allow your biases to enter the conclusions, okay? It's a temptation. How would we call that? Rozkošenie, I think. Rozkošenie, yeah, to be tempted, okay? To be attracted. You have that feeling that you want to say why, okay? But be careful about that, okay? Now, of course, this is an opportunity to explain the meaning of your results. And remember, like when you're in your discussion here, that the focus should be able to help the reader understand the study, and that the highlight should be only on the study area. So try, you know, really, when you do the edit of your paper, and if you see things that, in your opinion, are unrelated, you know, to the focus or the sphere of the study, especially the study data, then move it away. If it's not related, or if it has very little importance, try to keep it out. All right, so I'm going to leave this here, and I'm going to go on to the next part, which is our conclusion. Okay, everybody, hopefully that was helpful to you. You know, just basically in your discussion, you have the empirical data, okay, that real stuff that you found out and everything. But you have to just keep in mind, though, that it's not about your personality. You as a researcher, as a scientist, you have to be as unbiased, nestrani, as possible, okay? That means that any of your opinions, of course, they're valid. It's just that you have to be careful of, you know, expressing your opinions without having any data or proof or evidence to support your feelings and thoughts on your results. All right. What I'm going to do now, as I just said in the previous slide, I want to go into the conclusions. It's not going to take very long. This is a shorter presentation, I suppose. And then I'm going to leave you with two videos from Grammar Squirrel, okay? And Grammar Squirrel is going to talk about, you know, like citing sources and choosing your sources and things like that, okay? Anyways, let's go back into our into our PowerPoint presentation here. All right, so, you know, the whole thing about your paper, it's like a circle, okay? So you can have your thesis statement, okay, your hypothesis, your problem statement, okay? And so you're going to be, you know, going back to that. All right, so the conclusion, it basically answers the question, well, so what, okay? So these are those implications that we talked about with your discussion, where you can, you know, instead of writing it in your discussion, leave it to your conclusion, okay? Any kind of stuff that, you know, that needs to be finalized or finished up, you can state that here, okay? So you're going to, you know, basically, you know, your essay, your paper, it's going to close, okay? And you close it by, you know, leaving it with a final lasting impression, okay? So that your reader is satisfied that they've read your paper. All right, so let's have a look here. Okay, so your conclusion is going to restate that topic and explain why it is so important. So for example, here's something on tuberculosis. It's a widespread infectious disease that affects millions of people worldwide every year. Okay, so you have probably said that already in your introduction, but you're restating it, okay? You're saying it again. This is important, okay? All right, then. So when you restate it, okay, don't spend a great amount of time or space restating your topic. Just one sentence is really enough, okay? Because if you have a good research paper, that itself will make the importance of your topic apparent, okay? When it's apparent, viditelny, okay, ochi vidiet, okay? You do not need to write an elaborate defense of your topic in the conclusion, okay? So as I said, all you need is one single sentence, okay, to restate your topic. So here's a good example. Okay, so we talked about the tuberculosis. That was in the previous slide, okay? Here's another one. This one's from humanities, from social sciences. Okay, the Italian Renaissance was an explosion of art and ideas centered around artists, writers, and thinkers in Florence. Okay, Firenze. All right, then okay, so for example here, tuberculosis is a widespread disease that affects millions of people worldwide every year. All right, you can continue. So due to the alarming rate of the spread of tuberculosis, particularly in poor countries, medical professionals are implementing realizuju new strategies for the diagnosis, treatment, and containment of this disease, okay? So this is rephrasing it here, okay? And you're adding to it, okay? So this is what's being done about the tuberculosis. Okay, so we know that when the thesis is narrowed, okay, it's a focused view of the topic at hand. All right, and you have to, of course, rephrase it, but just make sure it's not identical or at least too similar to the one that you used, okay? So the rewording of your thesis statement in a way, or, try rewording it in a way that, it complements, okay? Not complement, but complement means that it's an extension, okay, of your summary of the topic of your paper in your first sentence of your conclusion, okay? This is basically what was written in the slide before. All right, you're also, okay, you're going to summarize your main points. So let's go on to the third sentence. So in developing countries, okay, such as those in Africa and Southeast Asia, the rate of TB infections is soaring, okay? Soaring means it's like going very, very high into the sky. Crowded conditions, poor sanitation, and lack of access to medical care are all compounding factors in the spread of the disease. Okay, so you're going to, reread the topic sentence of each major paragraph of the body of your paper. Okay, remember those introductory sentences. Okay, and you can go back and add them into your conclusion, but don't use the same wording, of course. Okay. All right, and try to be careful about repeating any of the supporting details. Okay, so you also need to avoid writing new information in your conclusion. Okay, so never put something new right at the very end. Okay, so it says here, this is especially true if the information is vital to the argument or research presented in your paper. All right, so here is our conclusion then, okay? We're getting there at least, okay? So we've done all this here. We talked about the crowded conditions, okay? Medical experts, such as those from the World Health Organization, are now starting campaigns to go into communities in developing countries and provide diagnostic diagnostic testing and treatments. However, the treatments for TB are very harsh and have many side effects. This leads to patient non-compliance and spread of multi-drug resistant strains of the disease. Okay, so at this point here, we can make a call to action. Okay, VISVA. Okay, we can make a VISVA as a call to action. Okay, if and when needed, you can state to your readers that there is a need for further research and that we need to pay more attention to the issue. Okay, so let's have a look here. If a paper that is more likely to call readers to action is one that addresses a public or scientific need. Okay, so if you go back to our tuberculosis, right, this is a very serious disease that's spreading quickly and with antibiotic resistant forms. Okay, so we can also, right there, so despite new efforts to contain, to diagnose and contain the disease, more research is needed or necessary to develop new antibiotics that will treat the most resistant strains of tuberculosis and ease the side effects of current treatments. Okay. All right, then. So again, so what? All right. Well, this is that opportunity to explain the broader context of the issue. It's a place to help the readers understand why the topic of your paper truly matters. Now, you should use the conclusion to answer the so what. The so what question, because the significance of your topic, it may not be so obvious to readers. Okay, so sometimes you need to be very direct. So for example, if you're writing a history paper, then you might discuss how the historical topic you discussed matters today. You can also use that in scientific writing, okay, the history of the research and why it has led to that moment. Okay, if you're writing about a foreign country, then you might use a conclusion to discuss how the information you shared may help readers understand their own country. Okay, so one place, what's going on there may help you understand what's going on at home. Okay, this is answering so what. This is why it's so important to understand my research. Okay, so if there is an environmental disaster going on in one country, well, it could happen. It could very well happen here in Slovakia as well. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the tips that are going to make your conclusion more effective. All right, then. So as I said, of course, you need to bring everything around as a full circle. Okay, so you have your introduction here and your conclusion. So in your introduction, just as animals around the world have evolved to better survive in their environments, botanical life everywhere has also been forced to grow and adapt to their habitats. So the greatest example of plant adaptation, however, is found in a unique succulent, more commonly known as the cactus. Okay, so the cactus is what a succulent, the kind of plant. So after saying all that, okay, when we do, after our methods and materials, our field research, okay, we come to the results and discussion. When we conclude, we can say that the succulent family is, without a doubt, right, Bez pochybou, one of the plant world's most evolved species. Their many unique traits make them perfect for survival in the cruel, okay, kruti, inhospitable, okay, nehostitelny, I guess, desert environment. Succulents are a proud family of plant that will continue to grow, flourish, okay, prosperovat, okay, and be respected by humans wherever they find themselves on Earth for millennia to come. Remember, just like in most other languages, Earth as a planet, okay, must be a capital E. All right, and so you ask a question in your introduction, and in your conclusion, you restate the question and you're going to provide a direct answer. Okay, so you can even write an anecdote or story in your introduction, but you don't share the ending. All right, so instead, write the conclusion to the anecdote in the conclusion of your paper. All right, then. So if you wanted to get more creative, if you want to put a, humanistic or human spin, touch, dotique, okay, on a paper on tuberculosis. So then you might start with a story about a person with the disease and, and refer to that story in your conclusion. Okay, so look here, for example, you could say something like this before you restate your thesis in your conclusion. Patient X was unable to complete the treatment for tuberculosis due to severe side effects, and unfortunately succumbed. Okay, so he died from the disease. All right. So even a question here. The disease still puts a strain on public health, being only second to HIV/AIDS and causing high mortality rates. Okay, so this is a very strong statement. Here's our question. Will tuberculosis in this day and age ever be eradicated, completely vyloučeny, destroyed? All right, and now we can make a suggestion here. Remember, this is the conclusion, okay? It's not the discussion. You're not putting your biases, your biased opinions, and things like that. But here you can say that, yeah, there's definitely a need for greater focus and investment in TB research, or more research needs to be done in order to fully treat the symptoms of tuberculosis. All right. These are very typical ways to end your paper. A lot of people say in conclusion, okay, in summary, in closing. It's not bad, of course, but I mean, these are so typical. There are better ways to introduce your conclusion. So as the research has demonstrated, or to review, okay, like to go back and to repeat something. Or you can even say, we can see, or it is clear, tuberculosis is a major problem in the world. Okay, so those first ones sound stiff and unnatural, okay? Using in conclusions, too straightforward, okay? It has a tendency to even lead to a weak conclusion. All right, so a strong conclusion can just stand on its own. It doesn't really need to be any help, or it doesn't need any help to say that this is the conclusion. All right, as I said, I'm not going to read any of this, but new information, of course, don't put it in your conclusion at all. And also, never apologize. Never make any apologies for anything like that. Okay? Because, I mean, for example, you might say, I may not be an expert, or this is only my opinion. Never say things like that, okay? And also be careful about writing the first person. Remember the active voice in your conclusion, okay? All right, so if you're going to write in the first person, well, the reason you shouldn't is because it's considered very informal and does not fit with the formal tone of a research paper, okay? A lot of publishers, they're looking for a combination of the first person and the passive voice, okay? But they'll all say, or at least I hope they would all say, that they don't really want to have, they don't want to see I, okay? They don't mind our team, our group of researchers, our staff, okay? Something like that, okay? But you have to definitely avoid using the first person, okay? I never use that, okay? It sounds too, it just doesn't sound professional at all. All right, so I'm going to go into our sources here. Okay, so the first thing I want to look at is a video by Grammar Squirrel, and she's going to tell us about the primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Okay, because you need to distinguish between your sources. Okay, so your source may come from the author himself or herself, or maybe from another author who reviewed the research. Let's take a look at the video here.
Here at UBC, as part of an ambitious project involving instructors, students, staff, and talking squirrels, we are developing videos to help you with your writing skills, because communicating science effectively is an incredibly important part of being a good scientist. Today, our old friend and scholarly investigator Grammar Squirrel will consider the importance of using primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. Grammar Squirrel has heard that she should mostly rely on primary sources when communicating science, but she has no idea how to distinguish between primary, secondary, and tertiary sources. By considering 3 different ways one scientific discovery was reported, we are going to highlight an easy way for Grammar Squirrel and you to do just this. First, meet Hazel Digsbury, as intrepid an explorer as you could ever wish to meet. Not so long ago, Hazel was thrilled to discover a fossil of a new species of mammal while on an exploratory dig. After a lot of hard work at the site of the dig, and back in the lab and in the library, Hazel realized that this new fossil was that of an ancient relative to the flying squirrel. She wrote up the research in a scientific paper and submitted the article to a science journal. And sometime later, she was thrilled to have the article accepted and published in the journal. Soon after, Nuts McGavin, a friendly competitor in the field of all things squirrel and fossil related, spent a good deal of time reading dozens of journal articles about flying mammal fossils, including the one that Hazel found, because he's writing a review of the existing literature on the topic. Sometime later, Nuts is thrilled to see his review article published in his favorite science journal. In this article, a lot of attention falls on Hazel's discovery, as well as on similar discoveries made by other intrepid explorers. Sometime later again, a curious would-be paleontologist logs onto Squirrelipedia to learn as much as she can about flying mammals. She makes Squirrelipedia her first choice as a source of information because it has lots of general information, it's easy to understand, and it has accumulated that information from lots and lots of sources. For example, it has the discoveries described by Hazel and Nuts, as well as other less technical information about these flying mammals. So, we have seen 3 different sources here, and every one of them includes information about Hazel Digsbury's amazing discovery. But how do we tell them apart as being primary, secondary, or tertiary? The good news is that we can do this by asking just 2 simple questions. As an example, with the help of Grammar Squirrel and her friends, we're going to work through the 3 different sources we just heard about and distinguish them as being primary, secondary, or tertiary. First, let's look at the journal article that was written by Hazel Digsbury. You know, the one about her own research and discovery. Question 1. Is the content of this article very specific? And by very, we mean very technical, very focused on one topic, and or very much targeted to professionals within its field. Okay, great. So now it's time for question 2. Did the author or authors do the research? By this, we mean, did the person or people who wrote the article actually perform the research themselves? Are they reporting on a specific part of their own work that hasn't been previously discussed in the literature? Okay, great. So that's a yes and a yes for the first source. So let's fill in a little chart. So for the first example, we answered yes to the question, is the content very specific? and yes to the question, did the author or authors do the research? And answering yes to both, we have a primary source. The content is very specific, and the person who actually performed the research wrote the article. Now let's look at the second source, which was the review article written by Nuts McGavin. Remember, it reviewed Hazel's journal article, as well as other journal articles about related research. So, back to question 1. Is the content of this article very specific? And remember, by very, we mean very technical, very focused on one topic, and or very much targeted to professionals within its field. Okay, great. And question 2. Did the author or authors do the research? And remember, by this we mean, did the person who wrote the article actually perform the research themselves? Are they talking about a specific part of their own work that hasn't been discussed in the literature before? Right, so that's the big difference between Nuts' article and the one written by Hazel. Back to our chart. And importantly, answering yes to the first question but no to the second means we have a secondary source. The material is very specific in terms of its content, but someone who didn't actually perform the research or make the original discovery wrote it. And finally, let's go back to the popular, if potentially untrustworthy, Squirrelipedia source. Same old question 1. Is the content of this article very specific? Okay, so that's a big difference between this source and the other two. And question 2. Did the author or authors do the research? Okay, another no, or at the very least an I don't know, which for this purpose is the same as a no. Looking at our chart, it is clear that this is a very different type of source. And yep, you've guessed it, it's a tertiary source. Now that's all been cleared up, you should hopefully be much more confident in deciding whether or not a source is primary, secondary, or tertiary. But if you're anything like Grammar Squirrel and her friends, you might still be wondering why this is important, or, more specifically, why using primary sources is usually preferred in scholarly writing. Perhaps the upcoming example will help explain. Back to our old friend Hazel Digsbury, who is curious to see how far the news has spread about her original fossil discovery. She does a keyword search and finds herself at Squirrelipedia. After scrolling down a little, she finds an artist's impression of the animal whose fossil she uncovered. Only the information is not accurate. Her original discovery suggested the mammal had a little bit of excess skin that might have helped it glide a bit, not dragon-like wings that it could use to terrorize the skies. And after reading on, it becomes clear that the message has been well and truly lost in translation. So, if you'd used this source as the one to provide information for your essay, or whatever you were writing about, you'd not only have been providing inaccurate information, but completely misrepresenting Hazel Digsbury. And this is potentially a huge problem. It's certainly one of the pitfalls of using secondary sources. Although they're an excellent way of getting general information for what's going on in a field of study, you could easily miss out on important details by ignoring the primary literature. For this reason, if you find a helpful secondary or even tertiary source, you should probably head back to the primary literature itself just to make sure that you're not misquoting the original author. You've probably been frustrated and or upset when someone has misquoted you or taken something you've said out of context. And when it comes to academics, it's no different. In fact, misrepresenting a source can even be confused with plagiarism. But if you use a primary source, not only are you guaranteed to be getting material that's very specific and relevant to what you're writing about, it'll also ensure you're getting the information straight from the horse's mouth. Now, there are a few sources that typically fall under the categories of primary, secondary, or tertiary, and these have been listed below for you, just as a general guideline. But remember, with any source, if you just simply ask yourself the two questions we've displayed in this video, it will really help you distinguish between them.
Okay there. So Grammar Squirrel basically said, be very careful about the sources that you choose, okay? Choosing a tertiary source like Wikipedia or something like that, because of passing on the information, the source becomes or the information becomes distorted. Okay, much like that dragon creature. Okay, so again, as PhD students, you're writing your research and your dissertation. Okay, try to keep your sources as primary as possible. Of course, you're going to have to use secondary, other authors as well, but please try to avoid Wikipedia and places like that. You can go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia isn't bad. I don't want you to think that I'm against it, okay? But of course, you can never cite Wikipedia, first of all. But you can go to Wikipedia and you can find all those, those secondary sources, okay? And it's a great way. It's almost like an instant search engine because you have everything kind of compacted, at least, directed towards that source though, okay? But either way though, any kind of search engine or Google Scholar will filter and sort of narrow down to the research or to the authors and papers that you want to include as your secondary sources. All right, then. So I want to go into citing sources in writing, and I'm going to let Grammar Squirrel finish this lecture off, or this today's video lecture, and she'll describe to you everything about citing your writing and avoiding plagiarism and things like that.
Here at UBC, as part of an ambitious project involving instructors, staff, and talking squirrels, we are developing videos to help you with your writing skills, because communicating science effectively is an incredibly important part of being a good scientist. Grammar Squirrel learned about different types of sources a little while ago, but, as you will soon find out, she now has cause to learn how to refer to these different sources in her non-journalistic science writing. When we say non-journalistic science writing, we are talking about any form of scholarly science writing, such as a lab report, a class essay, or a scientific journal article. But why is it sometimes hard to cite sources appropriately? Let's talk to an expert to find out.
One of the most confusing things emerges when you start citing sources in written work. There are a variety of different styles, and these vary between disciplines. For example, the citation style between the arts and science courses are very different. Because there are so many different styles, it's a good idea to ask your instructor or look at course documentation to see which style you should use. You can then perform a keyword search online or ask a librarian for help. Additionally, there are a few general rules that you can apply to all kinds of scientific writing, and everyone's favorite squirrel is here to tell you what those are.
Grammar Squirrel has just taken one introductory English course and one introductory science course. She was thrilled with her English essay results, but not so happy with her science report grade. After reading the comments, she realized that she needed to cite the sources she had used in the science report in a very different style. Firstly, while it is fine to quote sources directly in English, she learns that she should not be quoting them directly in science, like this. But she should instead be paraphrasing them, like this. Secondly, she learns that word choice in introducing the source can be hard to get right in science writing. This is because you have to interpret information whenever you paraphrase it. As a result, certain words imply a certain tone or value judgment is being made. For example, saying that an author found that video games distract squirrels from their work is not the same thing as saying that an author argued that video games distract squirrels. Often, the best idea is to be cautious wherever possible and use neutral sounding descriptors like these. And finally, the helpful librarian gives Grammar Squirrel a calming tip. about avoiding plagiarism in her science writing. Using direct quotes, as in English writing, automatically requires a citation. But when you're paraphrasing and summarizing information, as you often do in science writing, it can sometimes be hard to know what does and doesn't need to be cited. The librarian said not to worry about citing things that can be filed under the category general knowledge. But for further clarification on what this means, Grammar Squirrel goes to see an instructor.
A lot of students are very worried that they have to cite almost every sentence they write to avoid being accused of plagiarism. While I would advise you to cite something if you're unsure, the reality is that you don't have to cite as much as you think you do. The key is citing information that is not general knowledge. And by that, I mean information that would be new to most people. For example, imagine that you are writing an essay about the solar system and you want to include a book that you've read as one of your sources. If the book tells you that the sun warms the earth, you don't need to cite that information because we all know that already. However, if you wanted to say the sun is approximately 150 million kilometers away, then you should cite that book as the source of that information because it's pretty specialized information and most people wouldn't know it. Now, that may seem like a pretty obvious example, and I will acknowledge that sometimes it's difficult to know what is considered to be general knowledge and what is specialized information. So I'm going to hand it off to Grammar Squirrel to give you 2 more tips that will help you in this regard.
If you are unsure whether or not something does count as being general knowledge, such as this, ask a few friends if they already know what you've written is true, and try to pick those friends from different backgrounds. And if the majority of them do, as in this case, you can assume that what you've written does count as general knowledge, and for that reason, it doesn't need to be cited. However, if you happen to be writing online, perhaps you're a keen blogger, for example, you could always credit a useful source with more information about photosynthesis and hyperlink it. When deciding whether or not to include a citation, and in addition to asking your friends whether they know the information to be true, you should also pay attention to how specific that information is. If it falls anywhere towards the specific end, you should probably cite it, because it's unlikely that it would be generally known. Of course, just how specific something is depends on your audience. For example, in your lab report, you should be citing the source that told you how far away the sun was from the Earth. But if you were preparing an article for a science journal that only published research into the sun, you probably wouldn't need to. So, for a quick recap, in non-journalistic science writing, try to 1. Paraphrase information and refer to the source from which it came. 2. Use neutral sounding words where possible to relate to your sources. And 3. Only cite specific information that is unlikely to be generally known.
Hey guys, I hope that was helpful to you. At least Grammar Squirrel was able to tell you which sources you should focus on, especially your primary sources, as you who have done the research, as well as those secondary sources as well. And especially with regards to citing, okay? So you have to be careful, some information doesn't need to be cited, whereas some information, it's important. You can't avoid it. You have to cite it, and give acknowledgement. Okay, also, be careful about plagiarism. You don't want to, basically copy and paste. That's a very hot topic, not only here in Slovakia, but everywhere in the world, okay? Again, because if you plagiarize and steal somebody else's ideas or thoughts, that can be considered theft, okay? All right, it's called intellectual property. If somebody has written something, okay, you have to give credit and acknowledgement, to that author or to that researcher. All right, guys. that's it for writing the research papers. And I really want to thank you for your patience for the past like 5-6 weeks, or whenever, whenever we started doing this. I guess it was September 23rd or 24th, and already it's like October 29th, and we're coming up to Halloween. So as I said at the beginning of the course, I was just going to focus on the parts of the research paper, and then after Halloween, after Dushichki, we would talk about other stuff about, like, well, next week I want to start working on the resume, on the curriculum vitae. Okay, so I want to do a seminar on how to do that. Following that, of course, I've got several kinds of papers, like the cover letter, not papers, letters. Okay, so I have the cover letter to go along with the curriculum vitae, letters for publication. I have a great lecture on how to ask for money, okay, for a research grant. Okay, so there's all kinds of formats that you need to to follow, and especially elements, prvky, that you need to include in these papers. Okay. And then towards the end of November, we're going to start, doing posters. Okay, so you don't have to print a poster, of course, but I'll show you how to design one. Actually, I've got a great lecture that I've got permission to use from a former student who had a sideline, like a vedlejša kariéra. He had a secondary career where he worked in graphic design, and he knew how to design a great poster, especially for conference, okay, either student conference or any conference abroad. Okay, so he's given me permission to use his presentation. So I'll be presenting his work, and of course I'll be citing him as well. So, all right then. I'll leave it at that. You guys take care of yourselves and stay healthy, and hopefully I'll see you guys next week then. If not, then we'll see each other when we see each other. Okay, bye-bye, take care.